who are still watching, and welcome for the new viewers. In this clip, I'm on the Bungendore Road between Tarago and Bungendore, and by the end of the video I'll have reached Bungendore and gone beyond Bungendore to the Sutton Road, heading towards the Federal Highway. So fair while to go before we get to that. At the moment, as I said, we've just passed Tarago and passed the biomass reactor thing that I talked about in the last video. So I talked a bit about waste and rubbish in the last video, and I thought I would just finish off talking about that in this first part of this clip. When I make these videos, I record the audio later, so what you're seeing is a video that might have been made on a week or two ago, and then by the time I processed it and fiddled around with it a bit and then recorded the audio, as I said, it could be another week later. So yesterday, the 29th of July, I was out running on one of the roads that's on the edge of Goulburn. It's called Gang Road for those who know Goulburn, and for those who don't know it terribly well but might have passed through. When you if you go through Goulburn past the big merino and then take the roundabout just above that and go towards Canberra, instead of going to Canberra, if you go in the direction of where the sign says abattoir, there's a road that runs beside the highway bypass for about 2 kilometres. It then links up with the Braidwood Road, and the road itself is called Gang Road. As I said, it runs for about 2 kilometres. While I was running down there, almost all the way along, I noticed an endless trail of rubbish. And the rubbish that I saw was mostly takeaway food containers. Now, just going back a step or two from there, up around the big merino, there are a number of takeaway food franchises. There is Red Rooster, there's McDonald's, there's Subway, there's an Oliver's, there's a kebab place, there's Kentucky Fried, and there's a Indian restaurant as well. And on top of that, there's the bakery. So there's, excuse me, quite a number of takeaway food franchises there. This road I was running along, all the way along the road, the full 2 kilometre length of it, there were an endless stream of takeaway food containers of all sorts. Now, this is not a tirade against takeaway food, because I, like everybody else, enjoy eating takeaway food every now and again. We have what we call treat night in my family once a week, and once a week we have takeaway food. So I enjoy it just like everybody else does. It is an observation that it's a two-step process, the takeaway food process. The first step in the process is the people who sell the takeaway food are obliged, and if they're not required by law, they ought to be obliged by just decency to say that the containers that they sell their takeaway food in are either recyclable, and if they're not recyclable, they're clearly marked with some message that says, dispose of thoughtfully, and a picture of somebody putting the rubbish in the bin. So the takeaway food manufacturer or seller or retailer or whatever has done their job then by saying, well, okay, this package that you get, these burgers or chicken or whatever it is you like in, is either fully recyclable, and therefore all you've got to do is put in the bin with the yellow lid, or it is not recyclable, but there's a picture of somebody putting it in the bin to remind you to do that. Now, the second step in the process, the person who buys the food, the consumer. You're the one who went into the restaurant, if that's what you want to call it, the takeaway food place, bought the food. You have an obligation to dispose of the rubbish in the appropriate way. The appropriate way is either put in the recycling bin if that's where it can go, or if not, put it in the garbage tin. Throwing it out the window isn't an option. You'll be surprised, or maybe you won't be, but Victoria Park, which is across the road from where I live, is a very popular place in Goulburn for people to play in summer. There's an adventure playground, a skate park, a rage cage. There's all sorts of things to attract families there. And so families often have barbecues there, they have birthday parties, picnics, all sorts of things. there are rubbish bins provided, and most people use the rubbish bins. But of course, when the bin is full, people either have a tendency to just put their rubbish in a box beside the bin or a plastic bag beside the bin, or they just leave it wherever they had their party. If you leave it in the plastic bag beside the bin, you're hopeful that nobody will come along and kick it along the street or kick it along through the park, or that there won't be any feral animals wandering around at night fossicking through your rubbish for food. There are some people who surprisingly think that if you pull up in Verner Street and eat your lunch in your car and then either sneakily put the rubbish from it underneath your car or in the space between your car and the gutter and then drive away, somehow that rubbish will magically dissolve. Now, of course, that doesn't happen. And then either the council have to go and pick it up or it gets blown around the streets. There's an unwritten thing, I guess you could say it's a rule or a law, of people who go camping and backpacking and hiking and all that sort of thing, and that is that you take out with you whatever you bought in. So if you're going camping for a couple of days and you've taken food supplies and all of those sort of things that you need for a camping trip, at the end of the 2 days, you don't leave anything behind. You take it all away with you. And there's two reasons for that. One reason is because it leaves the environment the way you found it. And there is nothing worse than people coming along to a new area, an area they've not been to before, a national park or a reserve or somewhere that's beautiful that they've not seen before, and suddenly they're finding takeaway food or just rubbish of some sort that somebody else was too lazy to take away. The second reason you take that food, those containers away with you and all your rubbish away with you is that if people do that on a regular basis, then the animals that live in that area will come scavenging in that waste that you've left behind looking for food. And at some point, they'll become dependent on rubbish from people rather than learning to look for food the way they're supposed to. In many national parks and state reserves and things like that, there are no bins. There are no bins because, first of all, the council or the government or whatever doesn't want to have to pay people to go and empty those bins. But secondly, they don't want rubbish left in the bins. It will encourage wildlife to scavenge instead of looking for food properly. So if you are camping or something like that, the obligation is on you to take away with you whatever you bought in with you. If you're buying takeaway food, the manufacturers made the container, or the seller of the takeaway foods made the container either recyclable or rubbish, and your obligation as the purchaser is to say, well, I've got to put it in the bin. Throwing it out the window ought not to be an option. All right, well, that's probably enough said about waste and rubbish. As I said earlier, we're on the Bungendore Road, and somewhere along in this clip, it's hard for me to see it because I've got it in a small screen at the moment, but when you blow it up, you will see a range of hills. We're actually on the eastern side or the eastern shore of Lake George. If you think about Lake George, if you know the area, it's between Goulburn and Canberra, but we're actually on the eastern side of it at the moment. But if you think about Lake George as being a large saucer, and the hills that you see on the right-hand side here are the rim of the saucer. When you're on the Federal Highway, there's a ring of hills on the left-hand side. And so if you think of the rim of the saucer as being that ring of hills around Lake George, and the little depression in the middle where you put the cup is Lake George. And so we're on the eastern shore at the moment, and along this ridge of hills there are a large number of wind turbines. I talked before about the biomass reactor being used to extract methane and create electricity. These wind farms obviously generate electricity, and that's used to power houses, and I'm not exactly sure where the power goes, but I assume it goes into the grid and is used when it's needed. Now, there are all sorts of stories about noise from wind farms and the effect of the turbine slicing through the air, making that whump, whump, whump sound that affects some people apparently. But despite all that, wind farms are a very effective way of generating electricity, when the wind blows, of course. But when you couple them with batteries, they become a very effective way of generating electricity and then storing it. So all the way along the hills on the eastern shore of Lake George, you'll see these wind turbines. When you're at the lookout at the top of Lake George on the Federal Highway, the Wee Warara, I think it's how you pronounce it, lookout, you can see across the lake and see these turbines. There are quite a lot of them. The Bungendore Road here is in varying states of, or it's in various conditions. Some places along it, it's that quite open spaciousness that I've talked about before, where the trees are well back from the road and you get that sense of space. Other places, the trees are quite close to the road and it feels as if the road is narrow and a little bit closed in. It's not by any means unsafe, it just is different ways that the road is maintained. Parts of the road are well maintained, and you can see in the section we're looking at right as we're talking now, or as I'm talking now, there are markings on the sides of the road, and marking down the edge and around the middle of the road, and there are those white plastic guideposts along the edges, so that's all good for visibility, especially at night time, and all good for safe driving. There are other places where there are no markings on the edges of the road and the shoulders are not well made. It just happens to be quite good at the moment. So we'll be coming into Bungendore fairly shortly, about a minute and a half from now. Bungendore is about 30 kilometres from Queanbeyan, so it's a commutable distance from Queanbeyan, and a lot of people live there and either work in Queanbeyan or Canberra. It's a reasonable sized town, I guess is the best way to describe it. I don't know exactly how many people live there. I think we're just coming up to the signs for Bungendore now. I don't know how many people, yes, we're just passing the sign for Bungendore now. I don't know how many people live in Bungendore, but there's a school, there's a small, I think it's an IGA supermarket, there's a pub, there's a number of cafes and restaurants and places like that. There's a wood gallery where lots of local artisans, I guess is the best way to describe them, make all sorts of things out of wood or timber, from elaborate pieces of furniture down to small knickknacks, boxes and things like that. So actually beautiful pieces of work on display there. And there are a few other sort of arts and craft type shops and so on. It's a place that, as I has that sort of small town, village type feel to it that people like, I guess, because it's far enough away from Queanbeyan and far enough away from Canberra to be commutable, but not close enough to be bothered by noise and lots of traffic and so on. But it is also a main through point for people going to the south coast from Canberra and Queanbeyan, going along what would be, when you go into Bungendore from Queanbeyan, you go on to what's called the King's Highway. So it's can be quite busy, I guess, during the weekends in the summer months. There are some new housing estates and new developments that I've seen in the last couple of times I've gone there. And just making a right-hand turn here now and going on towards the Federal Highway, going on a road called the Sutton Road, which is not to be confused with the Sutton Road that is from the Federal Highway turn off to Queanbeyan. Although the roads both have the same name, they are different roads. Just a little bit further along from here, there'll be some signs advertising wineries, and a couple of wineries here on this road. Again, I can't tell you anything about the quality of the wines. I can just tell you that they're there, and I know that some of them do cellar door sales and tastings and all that sort of stuff. We'll continue on this road now for another couple of minutes, and I'll get to just below a place called Smith's Gap, which is a quite steep rise up to a break between the hills on the way almost out of the depression, I guess that you want to call it, that is Lake George and the area that goes with it. Kind of mixture here of woodland and open country with a few trees along the side of the road, and then the land either side seems to be fairly open. I think most of it's agricultural land for grazing purposes. We're coming close to the end of this video clip, so again, thank you everyone for watching and being interested in the videos. I'll talk to you again in the next one.